As I stared at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Los Altos Hills mansion, I couldn't help but wonder how I'd ended up here. 41 years old, married to one of Silicon Valley's most successful tech executives, and completely alone. The sun was setting over the Bay Area, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I took another sip of my wine, a $200 bottle of Cabernet that Michael had brought home last month. He'd promised we'd drink it together for a special occasion. Now it was just another reminder of his empty promises. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "Sorry, Emma. Emergency board meeting. Don't wait up." I didn't bother responding. These days, everything was an emergency in Michael's world. Another startup threatening their market share, another competitor launching a similar product. The irony wasn't lost on me that his company specialized in communication software while we barely communicated at all. I set down my wine glass and headed to our home gym. At least my Peloton would keep me company tonight. As I clipped into the pedals, I caught movement in the driveway through the gym's windows. A sleek Tesla Model 3 pulled up, and my heart skipped a beat. Jake was home early. My stepson had moved back in with us 3 months ago, fresh out of Stanford and working on his startup. He claimed it was to save money, but I suspected he missed home more than he let on. "Emma," his voice echoed through the house. "You here?" I unclipped from the bike, suddenly conscious of my tight workout clothes. "In the gym." I called back, grabbing a towel to dab at my face. Jake appeared in the doorway, and I felt that familiar flutter in my stomach. He'd changed so much from the awkward teenager I'd first met 5 years ago. Now he stood confident and tall, his startup t-shirt highlighting his athletic build. "Another solo workout?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. I nodded, trying not to notice how his dark hair fell perfectly across his forehead. "Your dad's stuck in another meeting." Jake rolled his eyes. "Some things never change. Want company for dinner?" The offer was innocent enough, but something in his tone made my pulse quicken. "I'd like that," I said, perhaps too quickly. "Let me shower first." He smiled, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. "I'll open some wine." 30 minutes later, I descended the stairs in fresh clothes, my damp hair falling in waves. Jake had set the kitchen island with plates and glasses, music playing softly from our smart speakers. "Hope you don't mind," he gestured to the open wine bottle. "Found this in the cellar." It was Michael's special Cabernet. "Perfect choice," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. Jake had ordered from our favorite Thai place, the containers spread out between us. "Remember when I first moved in?" he asked, passing me the pad Thai. "You tried to cook Thai food." I laughed, the wine warming my cheeks. "And Arlie burned down the kitchen." "Dad was so mad," Jake grinned. "But you were just trying to make me feel welcome." Our eyes met across the island, and something shifted in the air between us. "You've always been kind to me, Emma," he said softly. "Even when you didn't have to be." I took a long sip of wine, trying to steady my nerves. "You made it easy," I replied. "You were never the typical angry teenager dealing with a new stepmom." Jake's hand brushed mine as he reached for the sauce, and neither of us pulled away immediately. "I saw you differently," he admitted. "Not as a stepmom. Just as you." The kitchen suddenly felt too warm, too intimate. I stood up, needing space. "More wine?" Jake watched me move to the wine fridge, his eyes following my every step. "You know what I mean, don't you?" he asked quietly. My hands trembled as I pulled out another bottle. "Jake." I started, not sure what I was going to say. The smart speaker chose that moment to play Wicked Game, its haunting melody filling the kitchen. I turned back to face him, and he was closer than I expected. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he whispered. My heart hammered against my ribs. "We can't," I managed to say, but I didn't step back. "Why not?" His hand reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The touch sent electricity through my body. "Your father," I began, "is never here," Jake finished. "He doesn't see you, Emma. Not like I do." I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to lean into his touch. "We should stop," I whispered, but my body betrayed me, swaying closer to him. His other hand found my waist, and I gasped softly. "Should we?" he murmured, his lips inches from mine. The sound of a car in the driveway shattered the moment. We jumped apart as headlights swept across the kitchen windows. Michael's voice carried from the garage. "Emma? You still up?" Jake and I stared at each other, hearts racing. I quickly gathered the wine glasses while Jake cleared the takeout containers. Michael walked in just as we finished, his tie loosened and jacket slung over his shoulder. "Oh, hey kids," he said distractedly, checking his phone. "Having dinner?" "Just finished," Jake said smoothly. "Early day tomorrow." "Night, Dad." "Night, Emma." He disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with Michael. "How was your meeting?" I asked, more out of habit than interest. "Brutal," Michael sighed, still scrolling through emails. "Might have to fly to New York tomorrow." I nodded, already knowing how this conversation would end. "I'm heading to bed," I said, but he was already walking toward his home office. "Good night," he called over his shoulder. "Love you." The words felt hollow, automated like one of his company's chatbots. That night, I lay awake in our king-sized bed, Michael's soft snores beside me. But all I could think about was Jake's touch, his words, the way he looked at me. I told myself it was wrong, that I needed tea. Oh, stop these feelings before they went too far. But in the darkness, with the moonlight streaming through our bedroom windows, I couldn't deny the truth. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The next morning, Michael was gone before dawn, his side of the bed already cold. I found his note in the kitchen, "Emergency in New York. Back in 3 days. Sorry about dinner." I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the recycling bin. The house felt different knowing Jake and I were alone. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. Every shadow in the hallway held possibility. I tried to busy myself with yoga, with work calls, with anything to keep my mind off last night. But by afternoon, the tension was unbearable. I was in the living room, pretending to read, when Jake came home. He stood in the doorway, still in his startup uniform of jeans and a tech company t-shirt. "Dad texted," he said simply. 3 days? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Jake moved into the room, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa. "We should talk about last night," he said quietly. "Nothing happened," I replied too quickly. "But it could have," he countered. "It wanted to." I set my book down, finally meeting his gaze. "Jake, we can't do this. You know we can't." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Why? Because it's wrong? Or because you're afraid of how right it feels?" My breath caught in my throat. "Both," I whispered. He moved closer, and I didn't stop him. "I've wanted you since I came back," he admitted. "Every morning when you're making coffee, every evening when you're working out." His words sent heat through my body. "I'm married to your father," I reminded him, but my voice was weak. A man who leaves you alone every night, Jake said softly. Who doesn't see how amazing you are. His hand found mine on the sofa between us. Tell me to stop, he whispered. Tell me you don't want this. I should have pulled away. I should have left the room. I should have done anything except what I did next. I can't, I breathed. Jake closed the distance between us, his lips finding mine in a kiss that shattered every boundary we'd built. His hands tangled in my hair as I melted into him, years of loneliness and desire pouring out. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Emma, he murmured against my lips. The sound of my name on his lips was intoxicating. His hand slid down my back, pulling me closer. We shouldn't, I gasped even as I pressed against him. Do you want to stop? He asked, trailing kisses down my neck. I arched into his touch, all resistance crumbling. No, I admitted. God help me, I don't want to stop. Jake stood, pulling me up with him. Then don't, he said, leading me toward the stairs. Each step felt like crossing a line we couldn't uncross. But as we reached my bedroom, the room I shared with his father, I couldn't bring myself to care. Jake's kisses room were urgent, his hands exploring every curve of my body. I pulled at his shirt, needing to feel his skin against mine. He was everything Michael wasn't, present, passionate, completely focused on me. As we fell onto the bed together, I knew we were starting something dangerous. Something that could destroy our family, our lives, everything we knew. But in that moment, with Jake's body pressed against mine, it felt worth any price. The afternoon sun painted shadows across our skin as we gave in to our desires. Every touch, every kiss, every moment was electric with forbidden pleasure. Later, as we lay tangled in sheets that would need washing before Michael returned, Jake traced patterns on my bare shoulder. I've dreamed about this, he confessed. About you. I turned to face him, reality starting to creep back in. What are we doing? I whispered. He pulled me closer, kissing my forehead. Something we both need, he said simply. But we both knew it was more complicated than that. We were playing with fire, and someone was bound to get burned. As the sun set over Silicon Valley, casting long shadows through the windows, I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Or perhaps, finally, the most honest decision I'd ever made. Either way, there was no going back now. The line had been crossed, and we were falling into something as dangerous as it was irresistible. The next morning, guilt and desire waged war in my chest as I made coffee in the kitchen. The marble countertop still held memories of last night's dinner with Jake. Every surface in this house now seemed charged with dangerous potential. I heard his footsteps on the stairs and my pulse quickened. Morning, Jake said, his voice still rough with sleep. He was shirtless, wearing only sweatpants, and I forced myself to look away. Coffee? I offered, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He moved behind me, his hands finding my waist. I'd rather have you, he whispered against my neck. The coffee pot beeped, startling us both. Jake, I warned, but leaned back into him anyway. We need to be careful. His lips traced my shoulder. We have the house to ourselves for 2 more days. I turned in his arms, meaning to push him away. Instead, I found myself pulling him closer. His kiss was hungry, desperate, making my knees weak. The kitchen island pressed against my back as he lifted me onto it. Coffee forgotten, I wrapped my legs around his waist. His hands slid under my robe, finding bare skin. God, Emma, he groaned. You drive me crazy. The doorbell rang, shattering our moment. We jumped apart like guilty teenagers. "Mrs. Thompson," a voice called. "Package delivery." I quickly adjusted my robe while Jake disappeared upstairs. My hands shook as I signed for the package. It was a gift from Michael, a new iPad with a note, "Sorry I'm missing dinner again." The irony wasn't lost on me. Throughout the Why, Jake and I danced around each other in the house. Every accidental touch sparked electricity. Every shared glance held unspoken promises. By evening, the tension was unbearable. I was in the home theater, trying to distract myself with Netflix. Jake found me there, closing the door behind him. "We should talk," he said, sitting closer than necessary. "About how wrong this is?" I asked, not meeting his eyes. "About how right it feels," he countered. His hand found mine in the darkness. "Emma, look at me." I turned, finding his face inches from mine. "Tell me you regret yesterday," he challenged. I should have lied. Should have ended it there. Instead, I kissed him. He responded immediately, pulling me onto his lap. The movie played Forgotten in the background. His hands roamed my body as I pressed against him. "Not here," I gasped between kisses. We barely made it to his room. It was different from yesterday, more urgent, more intense. Every touch felt like fire on my skin. Hours later, I lay in his arms, watching the moon through his window. "What happens when your father returns?" I whispered. Jake tightened his hold on me. "We'll figure it out," he promised. But we both knew it wouldn't be that simple. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Coming home early. Flight lands at noon." Panic gripped my chest as I showed Jake the message. We spent the morning erasing evidence of our affair. Changed sheets, aired out rooms, restored order. But we couldn't erase the marks on my skin. Couldn't undo what we'd done. Jake caught me in the laundry room one last time. His kiss was desperate, knowing it might be our last. "I don't want to go back to pretending," he whispered. "We have to," I replied, fighting tears. Michael arrived home exactly at noon. He kissed my cheek absently, already on another business call. Jake greeted him with a casual "Hey, Dad," before disappearing to his startup office. Everything looked normal on the surface. But underneath, nothing would ever be the same. Days passed in a blur of stolen glances and hidden touches. Michael remained oblivious, lost in his world of meetings and acquisitions. Jake and I developed a dangerous routine. Quick kisses in empty rooms. Lingering touches when passing in hallways. Late-night meetings in the home gym when Michael worked late. Each encounter was a risk. Each moment together could expose everything. But we couldn't stop. One evening, Michael announced another business trip. "Tokyo this time," he said, packing his laptop. 10 days. Jake and I carefully avoided looking at each other. But as soon as Michael's car left the driveway, we collided. 10 days, Jake breathed against my lips. "We're playing with fire," I warned. He smiled, dangerous and beautiful. "Then let's burn." The next week was a fever dream of passion and secrecy. We barely left the house, lost in our own world. Jake worked remote. And I canceled my appointments. We made love in every room, marking our territory. But paradise couldn't last forever. On day 8, Michael called with news. Deals wrapped up early. Coming home tomorrow. Reality crashed back like a cold wave. That night, Jake held me closer than usual. "Run away with me," he whispered in the darkness. For a moment, I considered it. Leaving everything behind. Starting fresh somewhere new. But reality held firm. We can't, I said, tears falling. You know we can't. He kissed away my tears. Then we'll find another way. But we both felt the shift. The fantasy was ending. Michael returned, bringing expensive gifts and empty promises. Life resumed its normal rhythm. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every family dinner became an exercise in control. Every casual conversation held double meanings. Jake and I still found moments together. Quick encounters in the wine cellar. Passionate meetings in his car. Silent lovemaking when Michael traveled. But the strain was showing. The guilt was eating at me. And Jake was growing restless. I hate sharing you, he confessed one night. We were in the pool house, our bodies still entwined. I hate watching him ignore you. I traced his face in the moonlight. We knew what this was, I reminded him. But did we? Had we really understood what we were starting? The next morning, I found a note in my yoga room. Meet me tonight. The guest house. 11 p.m. Jake's handwriting made my heart race. I knew I should say no. Knew we were pushing our luck. But at 11, I slipped out of bed. Michael didn't even stir. The guest house was lit only by candles. Jake waited inside, looking troubled. We need to talk, he said. Those words never meant anything good. He paced the room, running hands through his hair. I can't do this anymore, he finally said. My heart stopped. The sneaking around, the lying. He turned to face me. I want all of you, Emma. Not just stolen moments. I sat heavily on the bed. What are you saying? He knelt before me, taking my hands. Leave him. Be with me. The words hung in the air between us. Jake. I mean it, he pressed. We could move to Austin. Or Miami. Start fresh. His eyes held such hope. Such love. It broke my heart. Your father would never forgive us, I whispered. I don't care, he insisted. I love you. The words hit me like a physical blow. We'd never said them before. Never crossed that final line. Tears filled my eyes as I cupped his face. I love you too, I admitted. But a noise outside cut me off. Footsteps on gravel. A familiar voice. Emma? Are you out here? Michael. Jake and I froze, panic rising. The guest house door handle turned. And in that moment, everything changed. Time seemed to stop as the door slowly opened. Jake pushed me behind the couch, diving after me. We held our breath, hearts pounding in unison. Emma? Mika. El called again, his voice closer. The candlelight flickered as he stepped inside. I could see his shoes through the gap beneath the couch. He paused, surveying the room. Huh, he muttered. Could have sworn I saw light out here. My phone buzzed in my pocket, his text arriving. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. Michael's feet turned toward the couch. I closed my eyes, waiting for discovery. For everything to explode. But then his phone rang. Michael Thompson, he answered, stepping away. Yes, I can talk. The Singapore deal? His voice faded as he walked back to the house. Jake and I remained frozen for several minutes. Finally, he helped me up, both of us shaking. That was too close, I whispered. He pulled me into his arms. "Maybe it's a sign," he said. "We can't keep doing this." I knew he was right. The risk was becoming too great. The next morning, Michael announced another trip. London this time. 2 weeks minimum. Jake and I exchanged glances across the breakfast table. We both knew what it meant. 2 weeks to decide our future. 2 weeks to make impossible choices. That night, Jake came to my room. Michael was already on his flight to London. "I meant what I said," Jake whispered against my skin. "About leaving. About us." His kisses traced promises down my neck. "I have money saved," he continued. "My startup's doing well." I arched into his touch, trying to think clearly. "Your father would find us," I gasped. "Let him," Jake said fiercely. "I'm tired of hiding." We made love with a desperate intensity, as if each time might be our last. The next few days passed in a haze of passion and planning. Jake researched houses in Austin. I looked into divorce lawyers. We were really going to do this. Really going to blow up our lives. Then the email arrived. From Michael's assistant. "Thought you'd want to see this, Emma." Attached was a property listing. Our dream house in Woodside. The one I'd shown Michael last year. Surprise, the email continued. "Michael's been working on this for months. He wants to give you the keys when he returns. Don't tell him I spoiled it." I stared at the screen, tears forming. The house I'd always wanted. The life I'd dreamed of. With the wrong man. Jake found me crying in the kitchen. I showed him the email. His face fell as he read it. "He's trying," I whispered. "In his way." Jake's jaw tightened. Buying houses doesn't make up for neglect. But we both felt the shift. The complicated reality of what we were planning. That night, we lay awake in his bed. "Maybe we're being selfish," I said softly. Jake propped himself up on an elbow. "Is it selfish to want happiness?" I traced his face in the darkness. "It is when it hurts others." The next few days were tense. We both knew we were approaching a crossroads. Every touch felt bittersweet. Every kiss tasted of goodbye. Then came the text that changed everything. From Michael, "Coming home tomorrow. Big surprise for you." I showed it to Jake. He read it twice, then looked at me. "Tonight," he said. "We have to decide tonight." We met in the guest house again. No candles this time. Just moonlight and truth. "I love you," Jake said simply. "More than I've ever loved anyone." I took his hands in mine. "I love you too." But the word hung between us. Tears fell as I spoke. "But I can't destroy your father." Jake's grip tightened. "He destroyed us first. That doesn't make it right." We sat in silence, hearts breaking. "So this is it?" he finally asked. I nodded, unable to speak. He pulled me close one last time. Our final kiss tasted of salt and sorrow. "I'll move out tomorrow," he whispered. "Before he gets back." I clung to him, memorizing everything. His smell, his touch, his warmth. "I'll never forget," I promised. "I'll never regret." Dawn found us still awake. Still holding each other. Still saying goodbye. Jake packed quickly, efficiently. Called a friend with a spare room. I helped him load his car. Each box felt like another piece of my heart. Michael arrived home that afternoon. found me alone in our empty house. "Where's Jake?" he asked, distracted by his phone. "Moved in with friends," I said quietly. "Better for his startup." Michael nodded, already moving on. "Ready for your surprise?" He handed me the keys to our new house. I smiled through my tears. "It's perfect," I lied. That night, in our bed, Michael slept peacefully. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, Jake was doing the same. Both of us alone with our memories. Both of us knowing we'd made the right choice. The responsible choice. The heartbreaking choice. Life would go on. Michael would never know. Jake would find someone his own age. I would be the perfect wife. But in the dark hours before dawn, in the quiet moments alone, we would remember the passion, the love, the burning, and wonder what might have been. End.